It's a timely recording. The benchmarking analysis that you've just been doing with Urban Enterprise has dropped, and there's been some terrific feedback on it so far.
Yeah, it is. So we're a organisation that has lots of members from the Mornington Peninsula and Frankston, and we go and advocate to government about things we think they should spend money on down here on the Mornington Peninsula. In order to prosecute that argument as effective as possible, we wanted to prepare something that was data-driven, and we wanted to benchmark a region that we think we are pretty similar to, but we know we're getting different treatment from the government at all levels and all parties. So we initiated this report through Urban Enterprise to conduct some benchmarking analysis against Greater Geelong and the Borough of Queenscliffe. And what that does essentially is it looks at the way government treats our two regions funding-wise, as well as the challenges, the structural challenges that both regions are facing, because they're pretty similar. And for people that live in those areas, they realise that, there's a little bit of a challenge around, housing, public transport, access to jobs and education. And we think that the other side of the bay, in Cryo Bay, is getting a few more free kicks than our side. So we wanted to set the record straight on a few things and aspire to be an area like Greater Geelong. There's a lot of things we can learn from them and a lot of things we should avoid. But we wanted to set the agenda and start the conversation around where we think we should be getting a little bit more of a leg up, like the other side are doing.
Yeah, it's a really thorough piece of analysis, and we'll chat about it in just a moment. We've got document here in front of us, and we'll break it down section by section, look at some of the key metrics and highlights there. But I'd be curious just to spotlight you a little bit, because you've held this role for a few years now, but prior to that, you worked the roads and the streets of the peninsula as a candidate for federal elections. And through all of that experience, you've been able to jump into this role very well connected, and as a result of that, get some terrific outcomes for the region. So how did you start off, and what was it about politics that initially drew you to the space?
Yeah, good question. I've always loved this local community. It sounds like a cliche, but I've lived here forever. During the COVID lockdowns, when the 5K rule was in, I could actually visit every single house I'd been raised in as a kid, because I've really lived at the top of the peninsula my entire life. Been very fortunate. I went to school here, and I want to see this area do well. I got involved in politics after I left school. And when you get involved in politics, traditionally you got to pick one side or the other to use as a vehicle to try and work through some of that change. And that's where my interest was. So I worked for a federal member up in Clayton, Claire O'Neill, for a few years. And then I worked down here on the Mornington Peninsula in the role prior to this one. I did a little bit of stuff in between. I was working in marketing and communications for a children's disability organisation across the southeast. So I've done a couple of things. And then, as you mentioned, I was a candidate in 2019 for a major party. I really like what I'm doing now, though, because it's not party-based. I actually feel like this is the most sort of influential role I've been able to have, because you get to sit above the party system and you work with both of those parties. And, as most people know, the Victorian and federal systems here are that there are two sides of politics, and they are the major parties, the Liberal and Labor national parties. But, that's changing as well. We're seeing a rise in independents and minor parties. So I've always found that sort of stuff interesting, but I've wanted to see how I can replicate how we can get some of those positive outcomes that other parts of the community in Victoria are seeing in our region. So the model that I work for now, the Committees for model, there's about 6 or 7 of these across Victoria in places like Ballarat, Bendigo, Geelong, Gippsland, Echuca and Wyndham. And we're all doing the same sort of role. We're working with our local industries and local government to take a cohesive message to federal and state government and opposition as to what it is we think that they should invest in, what policy changes they should make, or what commitments they should take to the election. And we're able to do that in a non-partisan way. So that's a bit more powerful for government, because we're not aligned with any party or individual. We're actually here representing our members, all 90 or 95 of them, who really make up the key industries across Frankston and the Mornington Peninsula. So really enjoying this role now, and I feel like it's just sort of a natural progression into this role from some of the previous stuff I've been able to do. And because, I'm really passionate about this community as well, it's a really enjoyable and rewarding role.
Yeah. It's interesting. Listeners are probably hearing what you're saying and thinking, well, this is a podcast called Marketing for the Modern Brand, right? What is influencing decision makers at state parliament, federal parliament have to do with marketing? But it's a different lens, in my opinion, because what the committee is doing is advocating for change. And what you're doing in marketing is you're there to influence behavioural change. So advocacy and marketing, whilst two separate areas, they do overlap in some circumstances. I think that's why I was so keen to get you involved as a guest today, is to understand that advocacy perspective and how you're able to advocate for behavioural change through the work of the committee.
Yeah, and the marketing component of that is really important, because you have to separate your argument from all the others. Government gets asked every day for millions and billions of dollars, and government has its own priorities. The Victorian government, for instance, right now has been in for quite a while, and their priorities have been around school rebuilding, level crossing removals. Most of your listeners, if they follow any of this stuff, probably aware of some of these projects. But it's very competitive. And where we are today, we're in metropolitan Melbourne, but we're about an hour away from the city. So we need to compete against other parts of metropolitan Melbourne and other parts of regional Victoria to advocate and prosecute the message to government and opposition that our needs are more important. Now, that's not entirely true, because every region would think that its needs are just as important. And when we did this report and it came out last week, obviously the Mayor of Geelong had something to respond to about it, and he said exactly what I would have said if I was the Mayor of Geelong. And but the marketing aspect of it is absolutely crucial, because government needs to know what is important in a local community, because they're up there in Spring Street or Canberra, and they don't know what the challenges or opportunities or issues are in a local community on the ground. Only the business leaders and community leaders and the residents in those communities do. So one of our roles, again, is to take those messages, put them into some deliverable objectives for government, and then go to government with some solutions for that. And a lot of that does come down to marketing. Like, it is like a business in a way, where you're trying to sell your product. Well, we're trying to sell the needs of this part of Melbourne to a parliamentary system that for a long time has taken areas of like this for granted. So marketing is very important.
I fully agree there. Shall we jump into the report?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So as we were saying earlier, an extremely extensive look at the region and compared to Geelong and the Queenscliffe borough. Let's go from start to finish, and we'll just touch on some of the key points here. So straight away, we look at the executive summary here, and one of the stats that jumps out to me straight away is that there is a lot of similarities between the two regions. I think you made a great point in some of the interviews you've done since this was released, in saying we're not here to criticise Geelong and say they're this and we're us. It is very much inspiration from Geelong, and how can we leverage some of that inspiration and learn from that and implement in the peninsula. Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah, definitely. So if you're a football club and you finish 18th on the ladder, you're not going to try and benchmark yourselves against the team in 17th place. You're actually looking at the top of the ladder and who's doing well. And that's what this report is all about. Now, with the greatest of respect to some other parts of Victoria, we're not benchmarking ourselves against Swan Hill or places, out in Portland. They're great areas, and full credit to them. I'm sure they have their own groups like ours as well. But we want to benchmark ourselves against some of the best. And it's our view that we're quite similar to an area that has done pretty well. And we've seen over the last 7 years just systemic differences in state budgets where we are being let down. So the only way we're going to get any change through that is to have a compelling message to take to government. Everything in this report is just data driven. It's based on the last few state budgets. It's based on the previous election commitments. And it's based on the demographics of the two regions, which, as you say, are very similar. We've got a similar amount of people living here. We've actually got about 15,000 more in our area at the moment, but Geelong's got a lot of growth, so that will change. We've got a similar amount of businesses set up here, like yours, and we've got a similar amount of economic output. They're actually contributing to the Victorian economy. So if Geelong says it's an economic powerhouse of Victoria, that's true, but so are we actually. Obviously, the southeast of Melbourne is, but this part of the southeast as well definitely punches above its weight in Frankston and the Mornington Peninsula. And I guess something else that comes into the report later on as well in this message we're trying to deliver to government is that while the two regions are very similar, there is a clear difference in tax revenue, which we can get onto later.
Yeah, that's one of the most significant differences and one of the most impactful ones for sure. We'll definitely touch on that later on. But let's have a look at some of the housing and the affordability side of things there, because that's where, again, there's a similar overlap of figures, but there's also a few discrepancies. And the main one, of course, is the median rents side of things. So there's a huge discrepancy there. We can see the Frankston is just a little bit above Greater Geelong, but then significantly above all of that, we've got Metro Melbourne, and then the Mornington Peninsula is greater than that, of course. So how does those figures of housing affordability impact some of the potential outcomes that the region can get?
Yeah, so owning a house is obviously a challenge for a lot of people, young people in particular across Victoria. It's worse in metropolitan Melbourne, and it's even worse on the Mornington Peninsula. It's more attainable for renters or new home buyers to buy their first house or get into a rental in Greater Geelong, and that's because there's just more supply available. But also, the cost of those opportunities is far less than the Mornington Peninsula, the median Melbourne average, and it's less than Frankston now. And I think Frankston used to be, particularly Frankston North, used to be one of those places that a lot of people thought, well, that's probably where you could still afford your first home or at least get a rental. But even that area is going through a lot of change at the moment. So Geelong has the ability to offer its young people the chance to get into a home or a rental a bit easier. And what that does, that keeps young people in their region. It means that they're working on cafes in their main streets. During the week, it means that they're working in schools and hospitals and you name it. We've got a challenge to try and keep those young people down here, particularly on the Southern Peninsula, because if they're living north of Cranbourne, all of a sudden the journey back down to the Southern Peninsula is a pretty decent one. So housing affordability, whilst it's an issue everywhere across Victoria and the country, one of the challenges that we have is we're surrounded by 2 bays and an ocean and a green wedge, planning restrictions, and Geelong isn't constricted by some of those challenges that we are. So we're already trying to play catch up in that area, and it has a real impact on young people who may, in the end, not have a choice but to look north of here for work or education opportunities or a home.
Yeah. There's a lot of tangential impacts that occur from an inability to afford housing, inability to afford rentals. And as you touched on there, it goes further than just being able to pay for that and afford that. It goes to lack of jobs that are going to occur in the area, education outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. The next key figure, and I'll go through these numbers as well, socioeconomically, there's obviously a very high tourism growth on the peninsula. Number one in the state, 8 million visitors, and we'll touch on that further later on. And with that comes a perception that their area is quite well off. You see the likes of Sorrento, Portsea, Rye, Mount Eliza, and you think these are well-off areas, which of course they are. But the peninsula has a very high homelessness rate. And from a crime perspective as well, in comparison to the Greater Geelong and Queenscliffe region, the numbers are also quite indifferent there. So just on criminal offences alone, Frankston had 12,200 per 100,000 residents to the year ending of March 2025. That compared to the Mornington Peninsula, 7,500. So we're looking at just under 20,000 there total. And then between Greater Geelong and Queenscliffe, we don't even hit that 12,200 figure from Frankston. So there's a huge 8,000, almost 200% difference between the criminal rates there. It's massive, but there's this perception that it's all wealthy. But in reality, you go into the depths of it, there's a huge difference.
On crime, I think initially before this report, I would have thought it was probably similar to Greater Geelong, incidents per 100,000 people. But in the end of the day, it's actually the Mornington Peninsula Shire Council area that's pretty closely aligned with Geelong's stats. Yeah, Frankston is highly and overrepresented in those, and that affects a whole bunch of other things. It affects where people want to live. It affects social harmony, community harmony as well in the city of Frankston. And it also reflects some of those socioeconomic challenges that this region has. So you're absolutely right to say that a lot of decision makers in Parliament, in federal Parliament or state Parliament, view this area as a playground for wealthy people. And their perception of this area is that it is all about Sorrento and wineries in Red Hill or Flinders or Portsea. And, for people that live down here, they know that that's not the case. We do have the highest homelessness rate in Melbourne. We have the highest amount of people sleeping rough registered on a register than anywhere else in Melbourne. And it's a challenge that has gotten worse since after the pandemic. And most of those people you find are sleeping on the foreshore. There's terrible reports over summer where this gets a little bit of attention, but then when everyone goes back from the holidays and they're back to work, it does get forgotten about. So we do suffer from this being too aligned to some of those coastal regions. To be fair, on crossing the other side of the bay in the Bellarine, there's some areas that are similar like that. Point Lonsdale, and then the Surf Coast, and Ocean Grove, for instance. But our pockets of disadvantage are really challenging. There's some serious ones around Mornington, Hastings, Frankston North and Capel Sound. And we have often found that there are some funding mechanisms through council grants sometimes that are directed to that side of the bay because of those reasons. And the rankings of places like Norlane and Corio and Lara and Whittington, yet we're actually talking about suburbs and townships that are very similar to ours, but it often gets ignored here. That's our challenge as well. And again, it comes back to marketing, because we need to ensure the government knows that this isn't just about Portsea and Flinders. Those places have a role because they're bringing a lot of visitors down, but the people that live here throughout the year, getting that Capel Sound message to government has been far more challenging. So a lot of that just comes back down to what it is that we're advocating for. So we work with council and the community support centres to identify what it is that they want. A lot of it does just come down to funding, unfortunately, and different levels of government say that that's someone else's responsibility. And usually it's just left to volunteers or community charitable organisations to pick up the slack. But that's a message, the crime message and the socio-economic disadvantage stats is something that the report does shine a light on. So we're pleased to be able to bring that message to light.
Mm-hmm. You touched on a key figure earlier around that the region of the Mornington Peninsula, I should say, is pretty much on par with Geelong. So it's 8,500 on the peninsula. 7,500 on the peninsula, and then just roughly over 8,000 per 100,000 residents in Geelong. So they're roughly on par there. And then Frankston is overpopulated in that figure, overrepresented. Yeah. So how much, going back to perceptions, the peninsula has this perception of wealth and a bit of a playground for the rich. But Frankston traditionally has had the perception of being a bit run down, a bit rugged, and a criminal hotspot. Yeah. And based on these figures, that looks to be accurate. So how, as a committee, because you've got the two regions incorporated in your activities, how do you work on trying to get the outcomes for Frankston there that desperately need it based on these figures, whilst also balancing that with the peninsula, and then balancing that up against comparable regions such as Geelong and the Borough of Queenscliffe.
Yeah. Look, Frankston is going through a lot of change at the moment. If people who are familiar with Frankston, if you think about what it looked like 10 years ago, it looks nothing like it does today. And I'd suggest that in the next 10 years, it's probably going to look even more different to what it does today as well. There's been an enormous amount of government investment, and we need to acknowledge when there is government investment for our region into Frankston City. It's got a new hospital. It's had a significant upgrade of the TAFE train station. There are car parks that are being built. There are areas of the city that the Frankston City Council has also targeted to clean up, and they've done a pretty good job there as well through Plain Street and lots of parts of the CBD. But it seems to be when you focus on one area of the CBD, then another area seems to be a little bit dilapidated and run down, and then that becomes a challenging spot as well. There's been a few businesses that have had to leave. There's a lot of empty shop fronts. I think there are plans in place for this to change. Frankston has a lot of potential as well. So I was just at a sod turning event last week where construction started on one of the new apartment towers that's being built on the Pean Highway in Frankston. There's 3 of those this year that are going up. And bringing new people into the CBD and rejuvenating parts of the CBD that are currently unoccupied, like the ones that are near Cunmore Creek, will do some really good things to help clean up Frankston. Frankston also just has this historical perception that a lot of people who haven't been to Frankston still think it is like it used to be. Geelong also suffers this same image. When people hear me talk about Geelong as the benchmark, some people haven't been to Geelong for a while think, really? Geelong, that's pretty daggy. Geelong and Frankston have a very similar story from the 90s. Lots of people didn't want to live in either part. Frankston had a lot of issues. There's some stories you hear about, the Four Corners where the pubs are. There was a lot of social issues, a lot of high-profile criminal incidents, and that left a lot of people to want to leave the area. Geelong had this economic story that was just terrible as well, and a lot of people left Geelong because of economic reasons. They've both had a recovery over the last decade or two, and I think we're just a few years, maybe half a decade or so behind Geelong as well, but we're coming up behind them fast. And I think Frankston has so many assets that a lot of people probably don't give it credit for. I think it has the best beach on the Mornington Peninsula, possibly in Melbourne. And it may sound like a big call, but when you go down to Frankston Beach, you do see probably the best waterfront in Melbourne. A very accessible beach. It's very flat and it's incredibly clean. And in the 90s and 2000s, it wasn't clean. It was not a beach that I remember going to as a kid because my mum wouldn't take me there. Now it's the opposite. Like, it's the place where you take your family to go to the beach. So the council have done a really good job in trying to target some of those social problems head on. And we'll continue supporting Frankston City Council on those initiatives. And the government has also done a really good job in that. So there are a lot of challenges, but Frankston has the ability to continue to make itself a destination and not just the part of the peninsula you drive through to get down to Rye or Rosebud.
Yeah, I would agree with the beach profiling there. We just recently saw Mount Martha Beach got named, I think it was in the top 10 beaches in the country for the year. That's a fantastic beach, but Frankston Beach is definitely right up there as well.
I like Frankston Beach. It's my favourite because you don't have to go down a big hill to get to it, like a lot of peninsula beaches. But also the way they've activated that waterfront, there's a lot of festivals and events that are held there. It also has a creek that I can't imagine many places in Melbourne that have a creek and a beach together in their CBD. It's a pretty unique aspect of the city, and it's a shame that maybe 80 or 100 years ago or so, Frankston was kind of built with its butt not facing the bay, and it was sort of turning away from the bay. Now we're trying to turn it back around and embrace that beautiful waterfront, which is certainly one of the best waterfronts in Melbourne.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. Let's talk a bit more about the tourism side of things there. One of the best figures that we have on show in this region is our visitation numbers. So 8 million people annually, the highest of any location in the state, which is significant. Geelong not too far behind, roughly 6 million. But the key figure that comes out of that is the lack of funding for tourism.
Yeah.
And I remember being at the launch event for this report and seeing the graphic pop up on the screen. I've got it here in front of me. And it's the funding types from the financial years of 23 to 25 from the government to the two regions. Compares health, transport, utilities, education, regional development, tourism and justice as the key areas. And we can see here that there's been roughly 600 million spent in Geelong and Queenscliffe under tourism, and there is not even a bar on here to represent the Frankston and Mornington Peninsula region, which is insane considering the visitation that we have.
Yeah.
How do we address that?
This is about the heavy lifting that we're doing for Melbourne in terms of visitation figures. So, the funding that we aren't eligible for is for that reason. We're not eligible for a lot of it because we're in metropolitan Melbourne, but the government does pick and choose when we're in Melbourne and when we're not in Melbourne. If people recall, after COVID, we're obviously included in the lockdowns, which everyone will remember if you live here. But after COVID, there were these vouchers that people could get to go out and explore regional Victoria. Well, you could get an Airbnb in Somerville and you were eligible for that because because the Mornington Peninsula and the Yarra Valley were considered regional for those purposes, but we're not considered regional for a lot of funding, which is a real problem for us because we have to compete against Carlton and Fitzroy in inner city Melbourne when our day-to-day issues that we face are very much more like Phillip Island and Geelong. So we want to see more diverse funding given to the peninsula for regional development projects and for tourism because we are doing the heavy lifting. And if we've got issues around local infrastructure and roads and rail, well, in summer they're absolutely inundated. It's bad enough during the year with just local residents, but in summer when it feels like half the population of Melbourne is visiting, we're really feeling the full brunt of it. And regional development funding is certainly something that we are calling on the government to include us in. There are some projects that have been delivered in Geelong that we think would absolutely suit us over here. A convention centre would be fantastic, and Geelong's about to open their one, and it's good for them as well. They definitely deserve one too, but they're eligible for that sort of funding, and we're really just getting funding for services for residents like health and education, which, as we acknowledge, is fantastic.
Definitely, it's been significant. Yeah, exceptional.
Yeah. Frankston Hospital and TAFE in Frankston. But we're not getting anything that is enhancing the economic product of our region. And for every project that people can think of that does do that down here, it'll be privately funded, I guarantee it. And a really good story example of this is the ferry terminals that have just opened. The Sorrento one just opened last week. And the project that was in Queenscliffe that opened a couple of years ago was funded by a $10 million commitment by the state government. And the one that was opened last week in Sorrento was entirely privately funded. And it's those two terminals are sort of the story of what our report is, where they can see each other, nearly touch each other, but one is playing by different rules and is eligible for different funding. Their businesses over there pay different levels of tax. And then in Sorrento, we're just as close to Queenscliffe as anywhere else, but we're paying the same taxes that Melbourne are, and we're not eligible for half the stuff that Geelong is eligible for. So more regional development funding is certainly something we'll keep talking about this year.
Yeah. Let's talk on that tax side of things because that's one of the most significant findings from this report. Payroll tax estimates from 2024 are significantly contrasting. Geelong and the Queenscliffe region, $65 million in the payroll tax estimate. The Frankston and Mornington Peninsula region, almost 5 times that at $290 million. That is a huge contrast. And yet the key figure here is, of course, that the turnover estimate is roughly similar. The wages estimate is roughly similar. And the number of businesses in the two regions, again, is also roughly similar. So there's not a contrast in those values, and yet the payroll tax estimate is so much more significant, and that's due to the zoning, correct?
Yeah.
Metro versus regional.
The only difference there is that businesses are charged in regional Victoria a 1.1% rate, and businesses here are 4.8%. So basically, if you run a small business or any size business, you are taxed based on the amount of people that you employ, a payroll tax. And if you employ 50 people, it's 1% of that wage bill. Here, though, it's nearly 5%. And the reason for that is to try and attract businesses to move to regional Victoria, which is obviously a very good thing for government to have done. This has been in place for a long time. So obviously Geelong is applicable for that. And they probably should be, because we want to see more of those businesses go out to regional Victoria. They're very important and employing local people. Here, though, the issue that our businesses have is that, and our members, they're paying a metropolitan tax the same as a business in Collins Street or Flinders Street is. But those businesses in Collins and Flinders Street can look out the window and there's a tram that comes to their work, so their staff can take that. There's a metro tunnel that their staff can take to get into work from one of the train lines. If you've got a business in Rye or Bonio, you look out and you're not really seeing much heavy investment from government in capital infrastructure, diverse capital infrastructure. So we would argue that the government aren't proportioning the money raised from payroll tax to the areas that are raising it the most. And we are certainly raising a significant amount. And if the governments of the day, whether they're blue or red, if they don't want to invest in capital infrastructure in our part of the world, then maybe they can charge us a tax that is similar to the payroll tax rate in regional Victoria. So we'll put that to both parties ahead of the election. We already have in the past. And I know that every time we bring it up, it's obviously challenging because it's a significant amount of money that we're obviously raising for the government. But we're paying literally hundreds of millions of dollars more now than Greater Geelong in a whole bunch of other taxes, including payroll tax. But we're just not seeing the benefit in return at all, really. So the payroll tax one has been a debate for quite some time because, like the Yarra Ranges and an area like ours, we're sort of on the fringes of both metro and regional. And so, of course, we're not getting the opportunities when they arise, and then we're being charged in moments where we think we shouldn't be. So it's this sort of no man's land that we find ourselves in. And yeah, it's the bane of a lot of businesses' existence down here, because for some businesses, like it could kill them and make them want to move to regional Victoria, and I wouldn't blame them.
So I'll pose a hypothetical. What would be a good outcome from this? Would it be, hey, government, we're paying more in tax, but we're not getting any investment back, so we'd like to advocate to have that tax reduced to a regional level? Or is it the opposite and saying, look, we're happy to continue paying it, but there needs to be that investment? Which do you think the businesses would be more open to, or have these discussions been had with members and
Yeah, no,
and businesses?
they have. Unfortunately, though, we've got at least 7 years now of measuring what government is putting back into our region, and it's not a lot. So they would obviously say they spend a lot in Frankston, and there's no doubt that's true. But a business in Rye that's paying a metropolitan payroll tax rate probably isn't too fussed about what's happening in Frankston. So I can tell you they would definitely much prefer just to be put into the same bracket as a regional payroll tax rate, unless the government was going to announce before the election that there's a heck of a lot of capital investment coming our way. And we're talking big projects like we've seen in Geelong. So we'd want to see some significant announcements, but we haven't seen that in the last 7 years for anything south of Frankston. So I imagine we would, propose to the government and opposition that if they wanted to trial the Mornington Peninsula Shire, for instance, as an area that could be charged the same as regional Victoria under payroll tax rules, that would be something we'd certainly be interested in, because then at least that way businesses are able to keep a little bit more of what they earn, because they don't have a Melbourne metro tunnel underneath them, or significant infrastructure on the southern peninsula or throughout the hinterland. So if the government wanted to be productive in that way, that's certainly something we have raised with them. But obviously it's a significant funding raise, because the figure you referred to before, it's about 290 million to 65. Well, we'd probably be pretty close to that 65 if they change the rules. So it's that $225 million that the government would have to forfeit, or commit that funding to something else like improved rail line towards Hastings, which would be about the same cost, I imagine. So, yeah, we'll see how we go before November if there's any traction on some of these issues.
So further to the payroll tax discussion, there's also the discussion around what investment is actually coming back to the peninsula and per resident. And if we look to some of those figures, we touched on the tourism one earlier, but as we mentioned, it's a lot broader than the scope of just tourism. So there's the total estimated investment, TEI. And between those same financial year periods, we're looking at $4.2 billion spent in the Geelong, Queenscliffe region compared to an estimated total of around $1.8 billion in the Frankston and Mornington Peninsula region. So this is a big discrepancy, Josh, 2.3 to 1 ratio, massive.
Yeah, it is, and that's part of the reason why we wanted to do this report, because that's how a lot of our community and our members do feel. Should probably note also that 1.8 billion, a lot of that was for the hospital redevelopment and some upgrades to TAFE. So a lot of it was probably centred around those two institutions in Frankston anyway. But nonetheless, that's a significant amount of money, absolutely. But again, when we're comparing ourselves across the bay, that difference of, for every dollar spent on the Mornington Peninsula and in Frankston, $2.30 is spent in Geelong. And we think that's probably not the way it should be. We think given the populations and the business numbers are pretty similar, it should be closer to each other. But more important to that, to the tax argument we were talking about before, we're doing all the heavy lifting for the government anyway. So we're raising tax more than the other side, but it's being spent not just in places around Melbourne that aren't ours, it's actually being spent back in places like Greater Geelong. So we think that argument that the tax revenue should also match the government investment is pretty crucial. So that figure also correlates to, for every person, it's about $5,500 per person spent on infrastructure here on the Mornington Peninsula, and then about $14,500 or so for a resident in Greater Geelong. So we know that that's for things like swimming pools, roads, rail, schools, hospitals. And for here, it's the same. It's just far less diverse and far less funding as well. So the argument, again, to make to the government is that this is about a revenue-raising initiative that we're doing. The short stay tax as well, which is a tax on Airbnbs. We have more Airbnbs than any other local government area. So we're also raising a lot of funding for that tax revenue, but that's not getting spent in our region either. So we just want to see that tax get spent in the regions that are raising it, which is ours, and start to see a bit of a more fairer analysis over the next few state budgets of that gap closing a little bit more.
Yeah. And just to reiterate again, it is important to remember that there has been that investment in healthcare, in transport to a degree as well, but predominantly in healthcare through the Frankston Hospital, through Chisholm TAFE as well, on the education side of things. So there has been some investment, but it is the bulk of that 1.8 billion is focused around there. And there's other areas that could do with a bit of a helping hand.
Yeah, the difference is that region shaping infrastructure for projects that bring people into your region and enhance the economic activity and livelihoods for the people that live there. We're just not getting any of that funding. We're getting funding for things that are absolutely critical, like the redevelopment of the hospital and like TAFE. And they are absolutely warranted, and we're very grateful for them. And the government has done a great job in those two areas in particular. But they've also done a great job in those two areas in Frankston City, and that's it. So it's also a discrepancy we're seeing between the two council areas that we try and represent, where a lot of that funding is just not trickling down the peninsula to areas like Rosebud. Rosebud Hospital and Rosebud TAFE are just great examples of now the poor cousin, if you like, of their cousins in Frankston. Now, obviously that investment in Frankston is good for the rest of the peninsula, so we're grateful for that. But we would really like to see the government and opposition acknowledge a few more of the issues that face Southern Peninsula and Western Port residents as well, because we're seeing a bit more of a diverse spending and funding commitments on the other side of the bay in other parts of the Bellarine, and not just Geelong as well. So we just really want to see the government be a bit more equal in the way they do things.
So then let's touch on some of those priority projects then that we are calling for, with some increased investment and a little bit more of a look down on the peninsula. So this one, Hastings SUZ1 land, is probably one that a lot of people don't understand. They don't know the zoning things. I know I certainly don't. So explain that to us in very simple terms, what you're looking for there as a committee.
Yeah. Well, I have to put a warning out that I don't want to put anyone to sleep right now when I say this. But in Hastings, there is, and when I say Hastings, I'm not talking actually just about the township. Towards Hastings, from about Somerville down to Crip Point, there's some land that the Port of Hastings identified that they did not want, and they wanted the government to consider rezoning it for something else. So since 2018, the committee's been calling for some of that land to be rezoned industrial so that it can be used for something. Because at the moment, you actually can't do anything on it. You can't put a house on it. You can't put a school on it. You can't put anything on it. We would like to see some high-tech advanced manufacturing businesses that have really good quality jobs for locals stay on the Mornington Peninsula, because there's plenty of examples of businesses that have done really well and they get really big and they're in factories in Somerville or Mornington or Rosebud, and they get too big that they have to leave, and then they end up in somewhere like Dandenong South or Clyde or Hallam or somewhere out in the southeast. We want to see places on the Mornington Peninsula where those businesses can grow and thrive and do so in an economically, environmentally sustainable way. And that's what that SUZ land about. So the SUZ is called Special Use Zone Land, and it means you can't do anything on it unless it's related to port activity. So we want to see some of that rezoned to be a little bit more general for commercial purposes, which would create jobs and retain jobs in our region, because we see, and something our report identified, 1 in 2 people just about have to leave the Mornington Peninsula for work. Some of these proposals, particularly this one, would go some way in making sure that, you know, someone can live in Tyab or live in Hastings and then go to work in Somerville and come home. So it's about having those good quality jobs in our own backyard.
So in previous years, what's this land been doing? Who controls the land? It's just been sitting there. No one can put a house on it. They can't put a business on it. They can't do anything with it. So, So who owns or who's in control of it?
It's owned by probably hundreds of different people, actually. It's very large land. We're talking about 600 hectares or so. And it's not in one big square or one big rectangle. It's very messy. There's actually some parts of it that would really make sense to be rezoned residential. There's some parts in some of the communities like Bidden and Tyab, for instance, that we would think there'd be real value, and we've spoken to local government about this as well. There'd be real value in having that rezoned residential, because if we want to see more homes on the peninsula, then the Western Port side is probably the only space that can accommodate some of that. And then those areas that are already industrial-ish in nature, where they are zoned SUZ, well, a bank won't give anyone a loan because it's not zoned correctly. So this just takes that out of the equation, where if some of it was rezoned to industrial, and then a business can get set up straight away, and they can be doing things that are good for the environment, good for the economy, and creating local jobs. So it's about utilising the land that is currently nothing's happening on it.
That's a very important project for that region, is in the Western Port side. Likewise, another one, which is the Victorian Renewable Energy Terminal. So that's proposed to be at the Port of Hastings and will be a very influential piece of infrastructure. So if you just talk around what that actually is.
The government in Victoria identified the Port of Hastings to be the site for the Victorian Renewable Energy Terminal to service its Gippsland offshore wind zone in Victoria. This is the most advanced offshore wind zone in Australia. It's the only one at the moment. And what this would do is in Gippsland, a coal plant has been flagged to be shutting down for some time. It creates a lot of electricity. The government wants to implement offshore wind through a bunch of different proponents. They would create electricity that goes into the grid, but it's set up in Bass Strait. Bass Strait is the second most windiest passage in the world, apparently. And it is very windy out there if you've ever taken the Spirit of Tasmania. And it's a great opportunity for Australia to harness some green energy in a very suitable environment for it. To do that, though, you need a terminal, because we don't have any terminal in Victoria, let alone Australia, that has the capacity to build these turbines, because they are massive. They are like 3 times the size of an MCG light tower. They're huge. And we need a purpose-built terminal. It needs to be in Victoria. And the government identified that Hastings was the spot for that. So we support that, because we think there's also a good opportunity here for the government to invest in local roads, rail. There's going to be, jobs associated with this, clearly. And there's probably an opportunity to talk to them as well about some supporting businesses that can contribute to this, like with the priority we just mentioned before, the land rezoning. But also they're going to need somewhere to live. So this project has a long life, like what BlueScope Steel did when it came to Hastings about 50 years ago. So we think this is what the next sort of industry looks like. And if Hastings can become the hub of renewable energy in Victoria, well, we think that's obviously a good thing. So that's a proposal by the government, not one by us, but it's one that we certainly support. And when the government plans something for our region that we think is good, we really want to jump at it and support it.
So just to confirm understanding there, so this terminal would be the one producing the turbines, and then they would get shipped off to the Bass Strait region, installed there, and then the energy from those would come back through the terminal and then be put onto the grid across the state. Is that right?
Nearly. So the role in Hastings is just to be an assembly terminal. So they come by ship. They can't come by train because they're way too big. Yeah, and I've seen footage of these things where there's a massive ship and there's a couple of them on the back of the ship, and they take up the whole ship. And I couldn't believe it, because it's actually not the turbine, it's the propeller at the top of the turbine. That's how big these things are, yeah. So these things are very big. So they go to Hastings and they get assembled upright by cranes onto another ship, and then they go out to sea past Wilson's Promontory, and then they get installed. Then from there, they then connect to the grid where Hazelwood is in Gippsland, and that's where the electricity gets produced. And then they'll come back to Hastings and pick up the next to install. So we're just an assembly port, but that's very important, because these things are so heavy that you need the infrastructure capable of assembling them safely. And there's also a really good tie-in there with HMAS Cerberus, which is obviously in our community as well, where the Navy have a really good defence training site. And you're going to need some significant training to go out to these dangerous places. And there are European countries that have been doing this for about 30 years. So we are just playing catch-up here. But Hastings has a central role to that industry. And so it's an opportunity we want to continue to embrace.
And as you touched on there, fantastic for jobs in the local area as well, which would be absolutely brilliant. Let's touch on visitor economy. And this is one that I quite enjoy. So I love going for my runs. Long runs on the weekend is the go-to. And one of my favourite trails is starting at the Civic Reserve in Mornington, Duns Road, taking the Harrop Road Trail all the way through down to Mount Martha Beach, through the Briars, up around, and then come back up Nepean Highway. That's right. The Esplanade and then Nepean Highway. One of the proposals being put forward is to enhance all the trails across the peninsula and link them all together so that someone could, bit by bit, go through around the entire peninsula and do all these trails at once. So the Peninsula Trail Master Plan, what's all that about?
So this is a Mornington Peninsula Shire project that we are supporting them on. So they've come up with it, but it's a great idea because it connects all the missing links that are currently already exist. So there's a lot of trails that people would know about, and they connect, all the way from Eastlink to Peninsula Link, and then there's a lot down the Bay Trail, through the hinterland, the Red Hill Rail Trail. There is an opportunity where we could link all those trails, and if you're into bike riding, which a lot of people are, obviously, this would be a place where you would go, okay, I'm going to Victoria, I'm going to do this ride and the Mornington Peninsula Trail, because it would be a draw card for a different type of tourism, and we really would love to see a bit more of that sustainable environmental tourism. which is obviously good for for the Mornington Peninsula. Those assets, a lot of them are already there. It's just about doing the final legwork to connect them all up. It's good for the visitor economy, but it's also good for schools and jobs, because there's some of these trails. The one in Mornington to Muriduck that's proposed, for instance, goes right past Mount Eliza Regional Park, connects with Emil Madsen Reserve in Mount Eliza, connects then past Padua College, and then it connects with Main Street in Mornington eventually. So you're connecting residents and tourists with some pretty highly visited areas on the Mornington Peninsula and through Mornington that would really encourage more active transport. So that's something the Shire have done a lot of work on, and we're very keen to support them on that project.
And then also from a transport perspective, the Stony Point rail line uplift, that's an important one as well.
Yeah, so public transport on the Mornington Peninsula is almost non-existent. 83% of people don't have access to it. So for the assets that we do have, there's a Stony Point line which goes from Frankston to Stony Point along down Western Port. And the reliability of that train is very difficult for anyone to take it. Sometimes it goes every 2 hours. Sometimes it doesn't go at all. If there's an issue on the Frankston line, the train's barely running and it's buses. It's very unreliable. So we'd like to see some business case redone, because there was one done about 6 or 7 years ago that we would like to see redone. And we think you can connect that Stony Point line a little bit easier for Western Port residents. And then we'd like to see some major upgrades done at Leewara Station, which would provide a transit interchange in Frankston East. Improving that train line is absolutely crucial, because it's already there. It used to go all the way to Mornington. They closed that in the 80s. We would really love to see improvements to that line to encourage people to change their behaviour in Western Port and get into Frankston a little bit easier. So that's an ongoing one.
And that's also linked back to education outcomes as well, because Leewara Station, right at the back of Monash University, Frankston campus. So that's, again, another big draw card. Can we get some of those Western Port students to come across to that region, as opposed to thinking, well, I might just hop on the freeway and go up towards Clays in that direction? For
sure. And, for a university like Monash, it would also connect them to their Caulfield campus, which then connects to the Claydon one by shuttle bus. So you'd be able to offer students more courses. They're a little bit restricted in what they can offer at Peninsula campus. They offer a whole range of courses at the moment, but it's obviously not as holistic as what Deakin are offering in Greater Geelong, because they've got their campuses where they can do basically whatever they like. The main Monash campuses are obviously Claydon and Caulfield, but Peninsula has a lot of potential, and obviously connecting that campus a little bit easier would make it go a long way in more offerings that the university could provide, and it would make it easier for students to get to those institutions if they don't have a car, because if they don't have a car, well, it's going to be hard for them to get around. So that's another midterm sort of goal that we're continuing to aim for. It's been on the agenda for some time, but we do think now that there's an appetite for residents to see the train line connected to the massive university hospital upgrade. And then right next door to that is Monash University campus. So we'll continue to work with our members and stakeholders on that one, because we know it's important to a lot of people.
One of the very exciting projects that has been proposed, and we touched on, Frankston is transforming its image, particularly over the past 10 years. It's completely changed what it looks like, but there's still those crime figures that we touched on earlier that will be, over time, improved, no doubt. And one of the ways to improve that is through the Pean Boulevard Precinct Revitalisation Program. And this one is one I'm quite excited to see come to fruition. There's been the artist mock-ups that have been put forward, and it looks absolutely spectacular.
It does, and we've already actually got funding for this. So this one is going to be a work in progress for a long, long time. $50 million was delivered by the local member for Dunkley, Jodie Ballier, last federal budget. And that's towards some road upgrades, which are crucial as part of this revitalisation. This revitalisation long-term will require significant funding. But what it will do, it will clean up Nepean Highway and not make it a highway. It's actually in the name. They want to call it the Boulevard. And they want to direct people to, if you go into the peninsula, take the freeway. That's fine. Take Murdoch Highway. But if you are driving through Nepean Highway through Frankston, well, this is now a destination. So you better get ready to get out of your car and check it out, because it's going to be really cool. Or take another road, because we are really keen to see what these new apartments will do to Nepean Highway. There's going to be a lot more people living on Nepean Highway, and a lot more nightlife and restaurants and shopping precincts along Cannock Creek, which will be really exciting. But a lot of that does require a bit of cleanup as well, even just basic things that people probably don't think about, like the power lines. The power lines are all above ground, obviously still. The power lines were above ground on Main Street in Mornington for a long time, and I can't imagine what it would look like today, because they've been underground for as long as I can remember. And it's really made Main Street like a shopping mall, where it's a destination, that entire street. You walk down it, and if you can make Nepean Highway a boulevard, make it a place where people want to go and dine and take their family and friends, then it will certainly clean up one of the busiest thoroughfares for Frankston and make it a place where people want to go, not just a gateway, but a destination, and then divert some of that traffic back onto the highways and freeways where it probably should be going anyway. So that's a Frankston City Council initiative. I supported it last year. The committee supported it, and I'm very pleased to see that funding has already been delivered for some aspects of that, but there is a long way to go, and we'll need to continue talking about that one, because any business that wants to move into Frankston, well, now's a great time to do it.
Definitely. It just sounds amazing. So the Nepean Boulevard, it's got a nice ring to it.
It does. Yeah. And some of the mock-ups and videos look really cool. So if it can look anything like that, we'll be very pleased.
Yeah. One final one we'll touch on, and it's probably the biggest one, is the Rosebud Hospital upgrade. So we've seen the Peninsula University Hospital have the massive upgrade in the past few years. It's just come through in 2026, finally, and that's exceptional for the northern part of the peninsula and then the Frankston region. But the issue is, for those that live down in Rosebud and Rye, Sorrento, Portsea, to get to Frankston is a 40-minute drive thereabouts. So then in the peak season, hour and a half even. Hence why the need to upgrade the facilities at Rosebud is so significant. And we've just seen the opposition state leader, Jess Wilson, she announced some big funding the other day if they are successful in November. So it's good to see that it's on the eyes of the opposition. But how can we get this happening? Because it's been a conversation that's been happening for quite a while now.
Yeah, it has. Community loves that hospital. We've walked through it a couple of times in the last year or so. And just to be absolutely blunt, it's a facility that is not fit for purpose. And there are some terrible stories of, possums falling through the roof. The roof is not stable enough. You can't do particular surgeries there. When COVID was happening, there were rooms that you couldn't separate from other wards. So you're really restricted in what you can and can't do there. The emergency is, they're doing really well in the circumstances. They actually got, Frankston and Rosebud have really good ramping records compared to other hospitals across Melbourne. So the staff are great. The attitude that patients have is also great, but they're operating in a building that is from a long, long time ago and is something you'd probably expect somewhere about 6 hours away from Melbourne. Rosebud is in metropolitan Melbourne. Melbourne is the Time Out magazine have just given it the best city in the world.
Yeah.
Rosebud is within the best city in the world, and it is a hospital that is not fit for purpose. So if the government is going to tell us that we are metropolitan Melbourne, and we are, well, we need to start seeing some metropolitan-worthy services and infrastructure down that way and not just in Frankston. Because if you're living in Rye, you're living in Melbourne still, and your nearest functionable hospital that offers you whatever you need is 45 minutes away. Now, I don't know anywhere else in metropolitan Melbourne where that's the case for local residents. It's probably only on the southern peninsula and out towards Flinders and Cape Schanck where that is the case. So Rosebud Hospital, it's been a political issue for probably 10 years or so. there will be many commitments. And it was pleasing to see a commitment on the weekend, because when a major party makes a commitment, it obviously means that the campaign is working within the community, and it's putting pressure on different sides of politics. We really would love to see the Victorian government make a commitment. I feel like I say that every year because they have not shown really any interest in making a commitment. They delivered $4 million last year to Rosebud Hospital when the health minister came down, and that's towards patient flow, airflow, and a few other minor things just to go towards the current facility. The issue here is not little Band-Aids. It's a complete rebuild. We actually don't even need the government to do it. The government can hand this off to a public-private partnership and get the private sector involved. The private sector could build it, and then the government would rent it. They've done this on many hospitals. They do it on certain roads as well. There's no reason why they couldn't do this as well. We just need them to have the guts to give it to a public-private partnership and get on with it, because every 4 or 3 years when there's an election on, this just becomes an issue, and only the government of the day can deliver it. So if the opposition wins 16 seats, we look forward to it being delivered and construction starting in the first term. That'd be a great outcome. But if the government is returned, then we really need a commitment from them that is actually serious and not just a flippant small amount of money, because I think the government's view clearly is that Frankston Hospital is their hospital and the Peninsula should be grateful. And we are, obviously. It's a fantastic hospital for the southeast. But the Peninsula is a very large geographical area, and there are a lot of people that Frankston is not really something that they travel through to. You know, unlike Geelong, with that Geelong comparison, the people who live around Geelong, they come into Geelong for all their stuff. That's where the services are. It's where the university is. It's where all the dining and entertainment is. It's where Cardinia Park is. It's where people go. On the Peninsula, Frankston is that city that has those purposes as well, but you can bypass it. And when you're living on the Southern Peninsula, we need to ensure that those residents and businesses down there have access to these sorts of important infrastructure and health services. And we certainly have right now a hospital that is doing the absolute best it can in the circumstances. And we'll keep putting pressure on the government to deliver something that's absolutely critical and worthy of a redevelopment. And we'll keep reminding them that, you know, this is the second time the opposition have made a commitment now in the last 4 years. And eventually we're going to have to just see something give, where the public or private sector just gets on and builds a thing. So it's an important part of our report as well, because it does go some way in delivering high quality healthcare to a community that is traditionally fairly older than this metropolitan Melbourne average. There's a lot of retirement villages and holiday homes down on the Southern Peninsula, obviously. And the average age of people living down there probably merits a fully functional metropolitan Melbourne-worthy hospital in Rosebud.
It's an incredibly extensive report, this analysis. And I commend yourself, the committee, and Urban Enterprise as well for putting it all together, because it's a piece of advocacy, a piece of marketing that will no doubt in coming years provide a huge benefit to the Peninsula. And it's fantastic to see projects like Rosebud Hospital, the trail, the energy terminal front of mind, and hopefully with a bit of give, not too far away from being implemented and seeing that proportional return of tax dollars come back to the Peninsula. So, Josh, thank you so much for your time. It's been incredible, and I wish you all the best, because you're doing some amazing work.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your help with this report as well, because it's also up to us in how we sell it and advocate, and the marketing associated with that through videos and forums like this is obviously absolutely crucial in those efforts. Because if we just hand a pretty dense report to someone, they're probably not going to read it. So thank you for your help as well. And hopefully we can see some positive outcomes.